This afternoon, we are unpacking a 4-step method to getting past your fear. Dr. Oudi is with us today, Amazon best-selling author, peak performance expert. He's the founder of Inspired Results, does coaching, training, headquartered just down the road in Abu Dhabi, and has got decades of experience. He's also father of 2 who keep you grounded, I understand. Doctor, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. I just want to let you know, just to pronounce my name properly.
Tell me.
Just because...
No, it really annoys me when I don't.
Don't.
Tell me.
The U throws everyone off. I'm
Yeah.
trying to sell it if you know anyone who wants to buy it.
No, I'm all right, thanks.
So get rid of the U. So it's Oudi, 2 letters.
Oudi.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to say that is one of, when we're talking about fear today,
Yeah.
that is one of my fears, is getting people's names wrong. Because I think it can be really embarrassing. And so thank you for being upfront about it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
You're not the first.
Oudi. Tell us a little bit about why you do what you do. Why is fear the focus of this new book that's just come out in January?
Right. So when I opened my chiropractic clinic in Canada, I was 27. And what I noticed in my first year of practice is that most people who come in with physical complaints, I'm talking neck pain, back pain, disc injuries, guess what's at the root of it? Not a slip or fall, not posture. The number one thing is the psycho-emotional state they're in. And there's a lot of emotions that we have. But what I found, as Napoleon Hill said, who's one of the pioneers in the personal development space, he said that fear is the most costly human emotion.
That's interesting. So this is things that we're talking about, people being held back. And I guess in some ways, if you're feeling mentally held back, sometimes your body can allow you to be physically held back from something. I can't do that. I'm in pain, or I fear pain, or this is going to happen. So you look at it from, it sounds like kind of 2 points of view. One is that performance and let's overcome that, but also let's address the pain in order to open you up mentally too.
Right. And sometimes it's not pain. Sometimes it's things like high blood pressure and, certain diseases that don't even, they call them silent, many of these silent diseases, right? So there's no doubt that the mind and body, as Ellen Langer, Harvard, the mother of mindfulness, says, the mind and body are not connected. There's mind-body union. They're one and the same. So when you affect the state of mind, you will affect the body. It's just a matter of when it turns into something in terms of symptoms or chronic disease or, like you said, pain.
Dr. Oudi, if people have just tuned in now, why should they stay with us for the next hour? What are they going to get from you for the next kind of 45 minutes?
Well, you know what? There's only one way to move forward in life, and that's why I called the book Fear Forward, and that is to face the greatest issue in your life. And if you want to make the greatest progress, you got to face the greatest issue. And guess what most people do? They face everything but that.
Yeah. So when you're speaking to people, and I know you go in and speak to corporates, you do individual coaching as well, have you identified the most common fears that people, specifically here in the UAE in 2024 are wrestling with, struggling with, can't get past?
Yes. And you know what's so interesting is the most common fear is the fear of the unknown. And guess what? It doesn't even exist. Fear of the unknown is there's not even a consensus in psychology that fear of the unknown is the fundamental or foundational fear. It's not. In fact, you can't fear the unknown because fear, being an emotion, requires substance in the mind.
Tangibility of some kind. So what about fear of failure versus fear of success? Would you mind talking through that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I think for an awful lot of people, they can feel like one and the same, but they are very distinct.
They are. And so what I usually do when I'm working with people is I create a fear inventory.
Okay.
So I say, let's list your fears. And we list them. And then let's say at the end, the 2 competing fears are fear of failure and fear of success. Well, then we just got to prioritize which one is the dominant fear. Because when you face the number one fear, like I said, the greatest fear, you make the greatest difference in your life. And that's where you want to invest your time, because that's where you're going to get the greatest return on your energy.
So let's have a think about an inventory of fears then.
Okay.
What some examples that people might put on that list for you, Doctor?
Yeah. So some are conscious fears. So I'm afraid of driving. I'm afraid of swimming. I'm afraid of heights, right? I'm afraid that my son is not going to do well in school. I'm afraid that I'm going to get fired. I have an X on my back at work, right? Mm-hmm. Those are what we call conscious fears because the individual is aware that they have the fear. Now, some people reject the concept of fear altogether. Say, I'm not afraid. So they'll call it a problem, a stressor, a challenge, or an issue. But what I've found is if you peel all those labels away, what you'll find sitting at the center is fear. So these are what we call unconscious fears that have been relabeled as something else.
I was thinking about this morning because I was trying to take a bit of an inventory of my fears, although I didn't have that label for it.
Okay.
And I don't love bats.
Bats?
Yeah, I really don't like them. But that's like a small phobia. It's a small thing. It's not holding me back. But what I was curious to ask you about is, when does fear tip into anxiety? Because when I think all parents, I would imagine, listening to this today, my greatest fear is something happening to my children. If I could put them in a bubble and keep them safe from harm, safe from the worst, because I honestly think if something truly awful was to happen to my children, I don't think I'd be able to come back from it. I really, I don't know if I could. But when is that a rational anxiety? And when is that a fear? Can we get some kind of drilling down on some definitions?
So what I've made a distinction in terms of fear, anxiety, and panic attacks, these are 3 different levels or intensities of fear. So panic is the highest level. That's when someone literally comes in and they can't even hold a conversation. They're shaking, right? And then you have like the basic fear. And then you have a lower grade anxiety that usually is about something that's farther away. And so it's low grade. But as the event approaches, it can escalate to a fear and a full-blown panic attack. So the question you're asking is am I justified to have a fear that my son or daughter, right, something were to happen to them? Well, the truth is, remember I mentioned that you can't fear the unknown. So if I was to say to you, what are you afraid of happening at the rugby match? Oh, my son or daughter getting injured, right? Well, you can't actually have that fear unless you have a previous experience with that yourself, what I call direct fear. So you've experienced it yourself. You were either the deliverer of a punch in the nose, or you received one, for example, on the field, or you witnessed it, heard about it, read about it.
Taking it on.
Yep. And that's what I call an indirect fear. So it's not a first-hand experience. You experienced this through the eyes of others.
There's a lot to unpack here. We've had messages through my social media, on the text line now today as well. Dr. Oudi with us today, best-selling author. His book is out now, Fear Forward. I'm curious to hear from you guys. Is there a fear that you feel like is holding you back, that is, stopping you from living your best life, the life that you deserve? We're going to help you out this afternoon, as I said, live until 3 o'clock. You can be completely anonymous, 4001. You can pick up the phone and have a chat with us. Same number as the WhatsApp, 04871 5500.
More of Afternoons with Helen Farmer is coming up next
on the UAE's number.
Dr. Oudi is with us today, best-selling author. He's got decades of experience as a chiropractor, a coach, a speaker, and he is certain that his methods have the power to help you wake up inspired, go to bed grateful, and in between, courageously pursue your dreams. The text lines are open. We have got a number of messages that I want to come to, and I think we'll probably do that after 5:30 because we've got some J-Lo to play in a few minutes. I wanted to ask you what purpose fear serves, because we're talking about moving past fear, about, living without fear. But presumably it's there for a reason.
100%. I got to unpack that. 3 points. First is, from an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense to be afraid of things, right? You wouldn't want to look a lion in the face and not be intimidated. You want to say, you know what, that thing's going to eat me. And that's why you go into a stress response, what we call the fight or flight response, right? So fear, when you look down from a high altitude, a cliff, you're supposed to have a racing heart, because that's a signal telling you, hey, back away.
Yeah.
So
now, just trying to think of an example. If you're taking a walk through the woods and you hear the snap of a twig, you don't go, oh, here's my buddy.
Exactly. You walk down a dark alley and you hear a snap. Exactly. You think, hey, there's footsteps.
Correct.
So it's designed to protect you. It's self-preservation. So it has a purpose. Now, if you look at the rest of the fears, these are what we call inborn fears, of what we're talking about now, or ancestral fears, right? But there's acquired fears. And these fears are, countless. There's a myriad of them, right? So you have a fear of someone with a goatee and a yellow shirt, because that was the guy who tripped you up when you were a kid or something, right? So there's so many. Fear of public speaking, like I said, fear of driving, fear of traveling. So, and there could be a hybrid where you have a fear of heights because you're born fearing, like I said, looking down a cliff. But then you had an experience like me where I was draped over Niagara Falls at the age of 4 by a family friend. And that was the source of my fear when I would watch a movie like Cliffhanger, at that opening scene where he's trying to save her and the glove, slips. My hands would literally be drenched. So fear serves a purpose. But guess what? What I'm trying to show people is fear is actually directing you as to what you need to face now so you can continually grow. Now, you mentioned living a life without fear. No, you can live a life without a conscious fear inventory. You can clear the fears you're conscious of, but the second you take a step in the next direction, you get on radio, get on TV, you open your own business, you expand your business, right? That's when you're going to become aware of fears you never knew you had, and that's helping you grow, because once you face those fears, you will naturally grow from it.
We're going to be talking through the method in a few minutes. We've had messages going. Can you share the author's book title? It's called Fear Forward, a 4-step method. Free yourself from stress, struggles and fears. We'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But just say I would love to know more. The Niagara Falls story gave me goosebumps. Me too. A message here saying, if I can't fear the unknown, what is this unpleasant feeling I'm having about the bad thing I think might happen?
Right. So you might think it's unknown. Okay, I'm afraid of moving to Canada. I've never been there before. I'm afraid of, going onto an airplane. I've never flown before, right? So you might be thinking, well, how can I be afraid of the known if it's the first time I'm experiencing something? Well, you can call it the unknown as a starting point, but it's the known component of the unknown that you're afraid of interacting with. In other words, the known is your past, a past experience, and you are afraid of the past resurfacing in the future. You're afraid, above all else, the fear of history repeating itself is what I call the mother of infinite fears.
I'm trying to work out what I'm afraid of. We can talk about that during JLo, because I often feel like you kind of go, oh, I'm not afraid of anything, but often we're just trying to protect ourselves of, oh, well, that's not a thing, and I don't actually want that. Well, so why would I think about eradicating it and pursuing it?
You know what? We've moved away from the word fear. We use the word stress instead. Like we've moved away from the word spirit, we use the word energy instead. And that has confused people, because now you say, I'm stressed at work, right? Yeah. My daughter stresses me out. I have issues with this person, or this is my challenge at work. Stress, challenge, issues, it doesn't matter the words you use. Like I said, at the center of every problem sits fear. And if fear sits at the center of every problem, it therefore stands tall at the center of every solution if you know how to leverage it. So what you're afraid of is something that you don't want to re-experience. And that is because you've labeled something in the past as negative. And anything that you label as negative, you live in fear of it repeating.
We are going to do a bit of a live consultation, because we've had a number of messages, everything from I'm afraid of being single and living alone, pitching and presenting, Ella saying I want to raise courageous kids but worry about the risky behaviour in teens, how to get the balance right. Interesting perspective there, Ella. We can go to the text line in just a few minutes, so please reach out with anything we can help you out with on 4001 on the app or the WhatsApp. You can give us a call. We'd love to hear from you on that same number, or you can be anonymous. Here's JLo. Dr. Oudi is with us today, Amazon best-selling author, peak performance expert, and we are trying to cram an 8-hour programme and indeed his new book, Fear Forward, into less than an hour of Dubai radio. So we're trying our best. It's a 4-step method. Free yourself from stress, struggles and fears. And you spoke really briefly before about how many of us get confused about this idea of fear and how we're renaming them now stresses, struggles, issues. But effectively, that's the stress response in our bodies to a fear. So would you mind talking us through the 4-step method? And then I've got quite a few messages to get to.
Sure. I'll put it in fast forward.
Let's do it.
So number one, it's important to identify your fears, the conscious ones you have and the unconscious ones you have, through a fear inventory. Once you've identified the biggest fear, that's the one you want to focus on, because that's going to give you the greatest bang for your buck, right? That's going to transform your health, your wealth, your relationships. So now what you do is you formulate a fear-based statement. This is a 4-step method that uses the acronym FEAR. So F is formulate a fear-based statement.
Can we do an example?
Yeah.
Not me, because we did that off air.
Yeah, sure.
Let's think of something. I don't know. You think of one.
Yeah. So a person has like all these fears, right? Like fear of swimming, fear of public speaking, fear of the water, fear of opening a business, fear of not having children, right? And then we prioritize what's the number one fear. And they say, okay, the fear is the fear of public speaking because I just got promoted and I got to be speaking to a team. Great. We've identified the fear. Now we got to turn into fear speak. What specifically is the person afraid of? Because it's not just public speaking. It's being humiliated or being laughed at. I had one gal that was afraid of being laughed at for her broken English. And that's what kept her back from actually stepping on stage. Mm-hmm. So we've identified what the fear is, what I call the basement fear. And as I was saying when we're off the air, you want to identify the basement fear, because if the fire's in the basement, you don't want to be spraying the peak of Burj Khalifa, right? So now we got the basement fear. That's the number one fear. We got the statement. I'm afraid of being laughed at because of my broken English. Great. Remember, you can't be afraid of something you don't know, which means you haven't experienced in the past where it's happened to you or someone else. That's the next step, which is the E. Establish your source incident or incidents. Let's just assume there's one. Okay? So with this particular person I have in mind, she was, a teenager and was, had to speak in front of the class, and they laughed. And initially she dismissed that as a potential source incident because she's like, no, I'm in the corporate world. I wasn't speaking to an audience with a microphone. Speaking is speaking. So now we established a source. So now we got the A and the R, right? So A is you got to tap in to anti-memories. See, we have memories of events that happened that we call negative, but we also, this is out of the research from Oxford, we store in our mind the positive aspects of events we've labeled as negative. Mm-hmm. And those positive aspects we can uncover. And the way you do that is by questioning your questions. Instead of why did this happen to me? How can I prevent this from happening again? You want to embrace it and say, what was the advantage of me experiencing exactly that?
Interesting. So in that example, what was the upshot?
Upshot was they laughed at my English. I then got closer to these three friends over here who I knew appreciated me. My teacher knew what I was going through. She gave me some special attention. I became determined to do well in school. I stopped standing up and speaking in the class. I put my head down and started getting good grades. I became great one-to-one as a communicator, and all these incredible advantages that she was unconscious to. And then once she awakens that unconscious mind by questioning her questions, she completes the perspective on the experience, and that experience is no longer negative. And if you change an experience that you once labeled as negative and judged to a neutral experience that did have negative aspects, but had equally positive aspects, you are free from the past. You break the chains. And then I just check in with the R. Let's revisit the fear. Close your eyes. You're speaking next week. Are you still afraid? If she says no, we're done. If she's not, I return to the next potential memory. We clear that in the same way, and we just go through that until the fear is completely evaporated.
Dr. Oudi with us today. If this is ringing any bells, any red flags coming up for you, or indeed you want to share your experiences, your fears, your questions, it's your very last chance, 4001. As I said, we've had questions about personal and professional fears, and we're going to go to the text line after we find out what's happening on our roads.
Dubai Eye 103.8 traffic.
With Yas Island Abu Dhabi, stay at iconic hotels and play at record-breaking theme parks. Book now on yasisland.com.
Should we be fearing the traffic,
I was going to say, if you have a fear of traffic, you stole my opening line, Helen. If you have a fear of traffic, maybe tune in a couple minutes or so. Dubai through Sharjah, E11 has an hour and a half delays currently. It is getting worse every time I refresh. E311, not looking much better. 1 hour delays there. D89 around the Dubai International Airport, heading towards Murdoch. You've got about 15 to 20 minute delays there. In Dubai, Hessa Street towards JVC, 16 minutes. Sukim, about 12 to 15 minutes towards Dubai Science Park, and E11 Sheikh Zayed Road, you've got 20-minute delays heading northbound, 5 minutes southbound. If you're going from the E11 Sheikh Zayed Road to E11 Sheikh Rashid Road, you've got about 25-minute delays there. It's moving slowly, and Abu Dhabi is looking great. There's no delays more than 5 minutes there currently. If you do see something that we need to know, please text us on 4001 or send us a WhatsApp on 04871 5500, but please drive safely and be patient today, please.
Please be patient. Please leave enough time. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Dubai Eye 103.8 traffic.
Don't forget, questions coming in already from Barry from Beat the Cyberbully. We are talking about the platforms, the games, the names that you need to know to keep your children, your teens safe online.
Weather check.
With Air Arabia. Air Arabia's city check-in has landed at
He's a best-selling author, peak performance expert. Dr. Oudi is in the studio. Shall we go to the text line? We've got a few minutes. A message here saying, not work-related, but I'm afraid of being single or living alone. I've been in a relationship since I was a teen, living now with a guy who is definitely not the one, but I can't imagine having to take care of everything on my own. How can I get past this?
This is complex, but this needs to be approached on two levels. The first level is an individual who doesn't want to be alone, or who's avoiding being alone, or afraid of being alone. That's just all the same point. That comes from a previous experience whereby they were alone and they've labeled it as negative. What else? The other thing it could be is fantasy, which might be my next book. Fantasy is anything that you label in the past as positive. You have a fantasy of it repeating, which is another way of saying, I am afraid of the opposite occurring. Right? So she probably has an experience where she was in a relationship and life was great in her perspective. And that's why she doesn't want to be alone.
Or, as you talked earlier about, a kind of acquired fear of seeing someone else who was perhaps alone, living alone, and it wasn't a happy experience for them.
Yes, it could be indirect as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Ella's raising a good point, and you are a dad of two, saying, I want to raise courageous kids, but worry about the risky behaviour in the teenage years. How to get the balance?
Well, if this person is afraid of their children experiencing risky behavior in the teenage years, that's because they experienced that in their past. I'm going to get predictable, whereby they displayed risky behavior, whatever that means, right? I'm in quotes, risky behavior. They experienced it firsthand. They witnessed it in someone who then, the trajectory of their life changed, and they labeled wherever that person went as being negative, and they don't want their kids to go down that path. Or they have a fantasy of someone who did the opposite of what they would perceive to be risky behavior and turned out to be a great individual that they want their kids to be like. It's either the fantasy or the fear.
So presumably we can pass our fears down to our kids. We were just
Yes.
talking off air, I've seen parents grabbing their children away from my dogs, and I'm like, it's a Cocker Spaniel, it's going to be fine. And
Yes.
now, this becomes this next generation of fear. But does that mean you can then pass courage on to your children?
Yes, that's exactly what I talk about in my book, is that I almost passed my fear of academia and school to my kid in KG1. I was so terrified when I woke up in the morning on his first day of school, and I realized it came from my KG1 experience. And my wife was passing on courage because she loved school, And this is, just so you know, when we're talking about the dogs, I actually see it in dogs, where my dog, a little puppy, goes up to this big dog, and the dog starts snapping. And then I'm like, has he had a previous experience with dogs? She's like, yeah, he was bitten as a puppy. And that's why he's afraid of little tiny dogs.
We've tried really hard to kind of condense your decades of experience in one book into 1 hour. But I think I've had a number of people asking for details of the book, Doctor. So with your permission, if people want to send me the word book, I will send you the link to your website. But in terms of how people can get hold of you, obviously you're going into corporates, you're doing one-on-one coaching. What is the best way to reach out?
Yeah, DrOudi.com is a great starting point. info@DrOudi.com, email-wise. And on all my social media handles are inspired Dr. Oudi. Except for TikTok, it's Dr. Oudi Inspired.
There you go. If you want details, you can send me the word book. I will send you the website so you can find out more. I feel like we've only really kind of scratched the surface. I'd love to come back and talk more about personal fears, about professional fears. As I said, judging by the number of messages, we've really tapped into something here. So thank you so much. The book is out now, and it was an absolute pleasure to catch up in
it was
person.
awesome connecting.
Dr. Oudi with us in the studio, as I said, if you want details of the book and, of course, upcoming engagements, there is a webinar coming up on the 28th of March, 50 dirhams, and you get a free copy of the ebook. Send me the word book, and I'd be very happy to connect you with that.